The number was 1,600. That hit me before the buildings did. 1,600 structures, demolished in a single decade. Structures that engineers today say we couldn't replicate with our current budget, our current tools, our current understanding of material science. Gone. Deliberately gone. And the official explanation is that we tore them down to make room for progress. That's not progress. That's erasure. I spent the better part of 3 months trying to understand what exactly happened to the architecture of the 1890s World's Fairs, the so-called White City of Chicago, the Paris Exposition, the Philadelphia Centennial Grounds. These weren't just buildings. They were systems. They were demonstrations. And when the fairs ended, the systems went with them, dismantled so thoroughly that what we have left are photographs and a handful of written accounts that, when you read them carefully, don't quite add up the way the official story says they should. There's a phrase I kept running into in the contemporary accounts. Witnesses describing the illumination of the 1893 Chicago Exposition at night. They didn't say it was powered by generators. They said it was as if the sky itself had been harnessed. One journalist writing for the Chicago Tribune on May 2, 1893 described the effect as light without source, emanating from the very stone of the towers. Maybe that's just poetry. Maybe it's the kind of romantic language that 19th century writers used for things they couldn't explain. But here's the thing, he wasn't the only one who said it. The official story goes like this. By the late 19th century, the industrial world was undergoing a revolution. Steam gave way to electricity. Edison and Westinghouse were locked in the famous war of currents, direct current versus alternating current, a battle for the soul of modern power infrastructure. Tesla's alternating current ultimately won, and the 1893 Chicago World's Fair was chosen as the showcase for this victory. General Electric and Westinghouse competed to light the fair. Westinghouse won the contract, and for the first time in history, a major public event was illuminated entirely by electrical power. It was a triumph of ingenuity, a demonstration of American industrial capacity, and a turning point in the public acceptance of electrical infrastructure. That's the official version. It's taught in schools. It's repeated in documentaries. There are plaques. Let me be fair to the official narrative. It is largely accurate in its broad strokes. Tesla's polyphase system was, by every technical measure, a genuine breakthrough. The transformation from gas lighting to electric illumination was real and significant. The war of currents was a genuine commercial and ideological conflict. None of that is in dispute. But what the official narrative doesn't explain, and what I couldn't find addressed in any mainstream historical account, is the infrastructure that supposedly produced 100,000 individual light bulbs burning simultaneously across 690 acres of fairground for 6 months straight in 1893. The generators required for that output by the technology of the era would have needed to be enormous, unprecedented, and they would have left a record. Let's start with the numbers. The 1893 fair consumed approximately 10,000 horsepower of electrical capacity. That is the figure cited in the official Columbian Exposition records, currently held at the Chicago History Museum. For context, the largest power station operating in the United States at that time, the Pearl Street Station in Manhattan, was producing approximately 508 horsepower when it opened in 1882, and had only recently been upgraded. To generate 10 times that output at a temporary fairground in under 2 years of construction, the engineering challenge would have been staggering by any standard. Here's what the records show about the Westinghouse machinery used to power the fair. 2 massive AC generators, described in contemporary engineering journals as the largest ever constructed, each weighing several hundred tons. The machinery was housed in a purpose-built powerhouse near the lakeshore. After the fair closed on October 30th, 1893, those generators were disassembled and removed. The powerhouse itself was demolished by July of 1894. The land was cleared. The records of the specific generator specifications, the detailed engineering drawings, the operational logs, are not held in any publicly accessible archive I was able to locate. The Westinghouse Corporate Archives, which passed through multiple acquisitions over the 20th century, contain extensive records from before 1893 and after 1895. The gap, the specific documentation from the exposition construction and operation period, is noted by archivists at the Carnegie Mellon University Library Special Collections as incomplete. That's not unusual. That's almost surgical. Speaking of missing records, there's a related anomaly in the Paris Exposition of 1889, the one that produced the Eiffel Tower. That fair also featured electrical illumination of a scale previously unseen in Europe. The tower itself was lit with 10,000 gas jets, yes, but the wider fairground used electrical arc lighting described by Lou Figaro on May 6, 1889 as of an intensity which the most advanced scientific minds cannot yet fully account for. The electrical installation was designed by a team under Gustave Trouvé, a French electrical inventor whose work, I found while researching something else entirely, seems to have dropped almost completely out of mainstream historical memory after 1900. Trouvé's personal papers were held by his family until 1943. What happened to them in 1943 in occupied Paris is not something the historical record addresses with any specificity. Which brings me to the buildings themselves. The architecture of the late 19th century World's Fairs has always been a source of quiet controversy among architectural historians, though you rarely see that controversy break into mainstream discussion. The structures built for these events, the Palace of Fine Arts, the Transportation Building, the Manufactures and Liberal Arts Building, which was, at the time of its construction, the largest building by floor space in human history, were constructed in periods of 12 to 18 months. Using the construction technology of the 1880s and 1890s, the conventional explanation is that they were built from staff, a composite material of cement, plaster, and jute fiber, which was lightweight, cheap, and fast to work with. This is true, and it explains the speed of construction and the relative fragility of the structures, most of which began deteriorating within years. But here's what matters. The speed isn't the anomaly. The scale is. The Manufactures and Liberal Arts Building covered 44 acres of floor space. It was 787 feet wide and 1,687 feet long. It enclosed 30 acres of open, column-free interior space under a roof that rose to 211 feet. The roof was supported by 13 arch trusses, each spanning the full 387-foot width of the building without a single interior column. In 1891, the lead engineer, W.H. Don, described the design in a June 1892 paper delivered to the American Society of Civil Engineers as requiring calculation methods not yet formalized in any published textbook. He did not specify what methods were used. The paper itself, I checked, is not available in full in the ASCE Digital Archive. A one-page summary exists. The full text appears to have been retained only in hard copy at the ASCE headquarters library in Reston, Virginia, where access requires a written research request. The timing is almost theatrical. Let me tell you about the photographs. I spent time with the photographic archive of the 1893 exposition held at the Library of Congress, accessible digitally, thankfully, through the Prints and Photographs online catalog. There are thousands of images. They are extraordinary, and when you study them closely, not as historical curiosities but as technical documents, certain things begin to accumulate. The electrical conduits. In the exterior photographs of the main exposition buildings, you can identify what appear to be conduit runs along the exterior facades, the channels through which electrical wiring would have been routed. Standard installation practice for the era, when interior routing was difficult and exterior conduit was common. Except in a significant proportion of the images, the conduit runs don't terminate at any visible junction box, transformer housing, or distribution point. They appear, in several cases, to run directly into the building fabric itself, into the ornamental stonework with no visible connection point. Maybe that's a limitation of photographic resolution. Maybe the connection infrastructure was simply not visible at the angle of the image. These are legitimate alternative explanations, and I don't dismiss them. But here's what troubles me. The contemporary accounts of the fair include numerous descriptions of the buildings producing light not just from mounted fixtures, from chandeliers, from arc lamps on poles, from decorative bulbs, but from the facades themselves, from the ornamental surfaces. One account in Harper's Weekly from August 1893 describes the Central Administration building at night as glowing from within the very stone, as though the marble had absorbed the sun and was now releasing it, slowly, by some mechanism we were not invited to understand. That's a strange way to describe electric lighting, and it appears in more than one source. Speaking of mechanisms we weren't invited to understand, there's a thread here that leads to Nikola Tesla directly, and it's worth following carefully. Tesla's patents from the 1890s are well documented. What's less discussed is the gap between 1895 and 1899, a period during which Tesla's laboratory at 33 to 35 South Fifth Avenue in New York burned to the ground on March 13, 1895. Destroying an estimated 2 years of documented research, Tesla appears, based on his correspondence and notebook fragments, to have been working on a power transmission concept he never fully disclosed publicly. His notebooks from this period, which were seized by the Office of Alien Property after his death in January 1943, were held by that office until 1952, when they were released to the Tesla Museum in Belgrade, Serbia. The notebooks contain significant gaps. Pages are missing. The sequence numbers don't always follow. The Alien Property Office's inventory of what was taken from Tesla's hotel room at the New Yorker Hotel upon his death, conducted on January 9th and 10th, 1943, lists 80 trunks of material. The final release to the Tesla Museum accounted for material that fits, roughly, within about 60 of those trunks. The disposition of the remainder is not part of any public record I was able to locate. Maybe I'm seeing patterns where none exist. But consider the timeline. 1893. The Chicago World's Fair demonstrates electrical capacity that strains the era's known engineering limits. March 13, 1895. Tesla's laboratory burns. Research destroyed. 1899. Tesla conducts his Colorado Springs experiments, claiming to transmit power wirelessly over long distances, but shutting down the experiment abruptly. His own notes from June 15, 1899 describe an effect he calls unexpected resonance amplification, and then say nothing more about it. The notes for the following 3 days are missing from the Colorado Springs diary, held at the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade. 1901. J.P. Morgan withdraws funding from Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's ambitious attempt to build a global wireless power transmission system. 1943. Tesla dies. His papers are seized within hours. The timeline isn't subtle. Here is the pattern, and I want to be careful how I describe it because I'm not claiming certainty. I'm claiming coherence. The architecture of the late 19th century demonstrates, repeatedly and across multiple continents, construction achievements that strain the limits of period technology. The electrical infrastructure of the world's fairs demonstrates power output and distribution methods that are only partially explained by surviving documentation. The documentation itself has gaps that are consistent, not random, not the ordinary attrition of time, but targeted in ways that cluster around specific technical achievements and specific individuals. The individuals in question, Tesla above all, but also figures like Trouvé in France, like John Worrell Keely in Philadelphia, whose experiments with acoustic resonance were attended by more than 2,000 documented witnesses between 1875 and 1898, before every piece of his machinery was dismantled immediately upon his death, were working on something. The pattern indicates they may have been working on the same something. What does that something look like, assembled from the fragments? It looks like power. Not power generated by burning fuel, not power transmitted through copper wire at scale, but power derived from the environment itself, from resonance, from frequency, from what Tesla called, in a 1930 interview with Hugo Gernsback published in the November 1930 issue of Electrical Experimenter, the medium which fills all space. He said, and these are his words in that interview, not mine, that the day would come when power will be free to all men equally, and the very concept of an electric bill will seem as barbarous as charging for air. He said that in 1930. He died in poverty in 1943. His papers were seized within hours. Maybe this is coincidence. Maybe the records are incomplete because records are often incomplete, because fires happen and archives are mismanaged and history loses things without malice. Maybe the construction methods of the 1890s have been underestimated by modern engineers who are too quick to assume that the past was less capable than the present. Maybe Tesla's wireless power research simply didn't work at the scale he claimed, and the missing notebooks contain nothing more than the documentation of failure. Maybe. But here's what I keep coming back to. The model that replaced the world's fair power systems, the model of centralized generation, metered distribution, and household billing, was commercially implemented with extraordinary speed. Between 1895 and 1910, utility companies in the United States formed at a rate of more than one per week. The financing for those utilities came overwhelmingly from a small cluster of banking interests, J.P. Morgan, the Rockefeller family trusts, and their affiliates, who also, in the same period, acquired controlling interests in the major electrical manufacturing companies. General Electric's board, by 1905, was effectively a Morgan instrument. The infrastructure of modern power, the one we still live inside, was not built by engineers. It was built by financiers. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The engineers were simply pointing in a different direction. There's an old woman I spoke with whose grandfather was an electrical apprentice at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. She shared with me a letter he wrote to his sister on September 22, 1904, which she had kept in a box in her attic for almost 60 years before she understood why it was interesting. In the letter, he describes being told by his supervisor to disconnect and remove certain secondary resonance coils from the main distribution panels 2 weeks before the fair's end. When he asked why, he was told that the equipment would not be needed going forward and that it belonged to a system which had been decided against. He wrote that he didn't know what that meant. He was 22. He just did as he was told. She let me photograph the letter. It sits in my files now, alongside the Library of Congress photographs and the Tesla Museum correspondence and the partial ASCE paper summary. I don't have answers, only patterns. The patterns suggest that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a genuine fork in the road of energy infrastructure. One path was decentralized, ambient, difficult to meter, and impossible to bill. The other was centralized, infrastructurally massive, and capable of generating enormous and predictable revenue streams for whoever controlled the generation points. One path was chosen. The other was not simply abandoned. It was, the pattern suggests, actively removed from possibility. The buildings came down. The papers went missing. The researchers died in poverty or obscurity or simply stopped publishing. The companies that built the metered model absorbed everything else. And the electrical bill, which Tesla called barbarous, arrived in every household in the eye. Here is what still exists. Tesla's patents, the ones that were released, the ones that survived, are publicly accessible through the United States Patent and Trademark Office archive. Many of them describe principles that modern physicists acknowledge as technically sound. The Colorado Springs notes, gaps and all, are digitized and available through the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade. The Chicago History Museum's Columbian Exposition Collection, which includes operational records, correspondence, and some construction documentation, can be accessed by appointment. The ASCE Library in Reston, Virginia holds physical archives that have not been fully digitized. The photographs are still there. The letters are still there. The partial records, the curious gaps, the language that doesn't quite fit the official explanation. It's all still there if you know where to look. What's not there is a complete picture. And I've come to believe that the incompleteness is the message. Every archive that documents an anomaly seems to have a page missing at exactly the right moment. Every engineer who got close enough to the question retired suddenly or died young or simply stopped writing about it. Every fair ended with the systematic destruction of the infrastructure that powered it. Not salvaged. Not preserved for study. Destroyed. There's a phrase I found in an internal Western Union memorandum dated March 7, 1902, which is part of a collection held at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, a memorandum discussing the company's response to Tesla's Wardenclyffe project. The memo describes the project as commercially untenable and strategically inadvisable. Commercially untenable, I understand. But strategically inadvisable, that phrase has stayed with me. Strategically inadvisable for whom? The part that keeps me up at night isn't the missing notebooks or the demolished buildings or even the suspicious timing of who controlled which archives when. The part that keeps me up at night is the sheer mundanity of the outcome. We didn't end up paying for electricity because it was inevitable. We ended up paying for electricity because, at a specific moment in history, a specific set of financial interests made a specific set of decisions. And the evidence that another path existed, the coils that were disconnected, the papers that went missing, the buildings that came down, was removed efficiently enough that we don't even know what to mourn. I found a photograph in the Library of Congress collection taken on October 30, 1893, the last night of the Chicago World's Fair. It shows the Court of Honor, the Central Plaza, at full illumination. The sky above it is completely black. The buildings are white, impossibly white, lit in a way that makes them seem to exist outside of time. And in the foreground, a small crowd of people looking up. They are looking up at the light. And none of them, not one, looks like they're thinking about a bill.